Week 9 Sunday games are in the books. I want to try to keep this thing from running too long, so planned for this episode is we'll get into kind of a handful of the games from Sunday, and then we will split that with kind of the other half of the games and some thoughts, including the Monday night game. That will be Buccaneers at Chiefs. A potential shootout from what we've seen with Tampa. They obviously can score a lot of points. Now Baker will be without Evans and Chris Godwin, so we'll see. And going up against that Chiefs defense, I think that's going to be a challenge. But win or lose, I think Baker has a good chance on the Monday night game to really show, for the national audience who maybe hasn't seen a ton of Buccaneers football. I think Baker Mayfield, this career revival is not a fluke, right? You saw him last year. He played really well. He gets what I thought was a very appropriate, you could make the argument that Baker is the most appropriately compensated quarterback of all of the guys who got extensions this offseason. Feels like, from a value perspective, his is about right. But yeah, big chance for them on the standalone game, national stage. So we'll see how that goes. And as I said, we'll combine that with kind of the second half of Sunday's thoughts. I wanted to start with the Bills and the Dolphins. Buffalo owns Miami. In this series, it is, I said this on Twitter, it is not a division rivalry. This is merely a division game at this point, because when one team just never wins, it's not a rivalry. The stat that I heard, and I believe this includes the postseason because it's an odd number of games, and they did have that playoff matchup a couple of years ago in Buffalo. Josh Allen is, I think it was 13-2 in his career against the Dolphins. That is, that's not made up. And Josh Allen, in those first couple of years, was obviously not the Josh Allen that we know today, right, as a potential league MVP. So I don't know what to say about that. Spans multiple head coaches for Miami. That spans multiple starting quarterbacks for Miami. To be 2-13 against a team is a team that you play twice a year. That is, I don't know if there's any other, be curious to know, right? I know there were some long-standing, really disproportionate records with like the Patriots and the Jets, but I would be surprised if there was another division matchup where it was that lopsided for one team. And it was discouraging for the Dolphins because that was the best game you've played all year, and you still lost. Albeit on a franchise record, 61-yard field goal by Tyler Bass. But that just, I feel like it sums up how things have been going for the Dolphins this year. Tua was 25 of 28 on Sunday. And it was not a bullshit 25 of 28 where, you see all these ridiculous rocket screens and short throws to the flat and, quarterback completes 25 balls, gets 150 yards. No, Tua was 25 of 28. He threw for 231 and 2 touchdowns. And they still couldn't win. That one wasn't on him. And the offense deserves credit. They played well. Mostert did lose a fumble, which, I know it wasn't in, the late stages of the game there, but when you're going back and forth like that, and especially for Miami in a must-win game, that one hurt. And so a couple of crazy stats, and feel bad for the prop bettors, especially because you guys all won the bet. It was the prop on Tua's pass yards for Sunday was 243.5. And going into the final drive, he was sitting at 254, right? So nowhere you're thinking, like, even on a rocket screen or some sort of fluky pass to a running back where he gets immediately tackled, loses 3 yards, you're still good. That was not the case with the way the game ended on Sunday. I've never seen that before. Tua's sitting at 254. They throw a pass that I think it went to Achane, and then Achane lateraled it to Waddle, and they lost 24 yards on the play. So you had won the bet easily if you took the over on Tua's yardage. And one play at the end of the game loses that bet. I don't know if there's ever been a swing like that, at least on passing yards before. Think about this. This is the other stat that just it doesn't make sense. Jalen Waddle caught a 12-yard touchdown in this game. He finished with 2 catches for -4 yards. As I mentioned, right, lost a ton of yardage on that final play, but that should sum up how the game went for Miami and really how the season has been going. And it's a weird year for Miami. And unfortunately for the Dolphins fans, I think you just need to ride it out. I don't see, even as we approach the trade deadline, I don't see the Dolphins being buyers. I don't think they're in position to be. I mean, they are paying a lot of people a lot of money, right? They had traded for Chubb. They traded for Jalen Ramsey. They're paying Tyreek Hill. They're paying Jalen Waddle. Tua got extended. I don't see them in a position to make any kind of splash move here as we approach the Tuesday deadline. It's not that dissimilar. I was thinking about this to last year's New York Jets. You have a highly compensated quarterback, gets hurt early in the season. You then lose a bunch of games. Now, the difference is the 2023 Jets were not out of the playoff race really until late last year, despite just horrendous play at quarterback. And obviously for the Dolphins, you didn't lose Tua to a season-ending injury, but he missed a chunk of the season that I think was just, it's going to be too significant for them to overcome. And this Dolphins defense is just also nowhere near what the Jets had going for them last year. So even though that was just a season to forget offensively for the New York Jets, that defense really kept them in those games and kept them competitive, or at least with an outside chance late into the season. It's a situation where you need the offense to be great if you're Miami, and they're just not. This is not the 2023 Miami Dolphins offense. And the rest of the way does not look good for them either. Coming up next week, Monday night at the Rams. Then they come back home. They host the Raiders and the Patriots in back-to-back weeks. Then they go to Green Bay. They host the Jets. Then at Texans, home against the 49ers, at Browns, at Jets to end the year. I don't see it for the Dolphins. I think this is one where you just have to, it's cliche, but got to go out there. It's more of a pride thing. Obviously, individual guys playing for potential contract extensions or putting tape out there for free agent opportunities. But unfortunately, one of the, I would say, more interesting teams coming into the season, it's just not going to go well for the 2024 Miami Dolphins. Rams and Seahawks was a really entertaining game. I think he wasn't in a pickup this year, but Demarcus Robinson was acquired prior to the 2023 season for the Rams, and he has come up big for them this year. Catches the game-winning touchdown, and it was a great catch at that. But he is their third wide receiver, right? You talk about the Rams, it's Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and to have the kind of production they're getting from Demarcus Robinson, I think that's a big deal, and I think it's a big part of why this 2024 Rams team has a real shot at making the postseason. And they're still very much, hell, they could win the division. Robinson already has 5 touchdown catches this year. He's averaging 15.6 yards per reception. Talk about a great weapon to have as your third guy. Now that Kupp is healthy and Nakua, a little out of character for him today. I've always looked at Puka as a pretty mellow guy, always seems happy, kind of glass half full, but loss is cool, throws the punch early in that game, gets ejected, but hey, Demarcus Robinson, next man up, he was awesome for them, and I think that's going to be a major asset the rest of the way. I also want to give Geno Smith credit. He's in year 3 of this career revival, Seattle Geno, whatever you want to call it. Not often that you see a guy who, I know Geno wasn't a first-round pick, but when the Jets took him in the second round, I want to say 2013, it was the 2013 draft, I believe, there was a lot of hype around him. That West Virginia team that he was on had a prolific offense, so he was kind of a star in that final year in college, and then obviously you go to the Jets, major media market, but there was a lot of hype around Geno, even though he wasn't one of these guys drafted in top 5 or 10. Didn't go well there. He bounced around the league, was pretty much a career backup for almost a decade, and now here he is with a new opportunity, and he's been making the most of it. This isn't just a couple games or even a half a season. This is now year 3 of Geno Smith playing good football for the Seattle Seahawks, and you got to give the guy credit for that. I don't know if we have a precedent of somebody's career arc going that way, but they come up short. JSN, huge game, had a career high in yards. Speaking of trios, just talking about the Rams with Kupp, Nakua, and Robinson, DK, Lockett, and Jackson Smith. This Seattle passing attack is, I think, going to keep them relevant. I know that their win-loss record is not what some people would have assumed, certainly not what the 12s would like, but I think Seattle, if these guys stay healthy, they are going to win these games. It's just sometimes those close games don't go your way, and this one didn't for Seattle. But offensively, great wide receivers. You got Ken Walker in the backfield, Charbonnet, Smith, as I mentioned, more than getting it done for them at quarterback. So don't sleep on Seattle. The one thing that is different, I would say, their identity. Their defense is just, not good enough, right? Historically, or at least since, if you go back to when Pete got to Seattle, their identity was, the defense is dominant and the offense, we'll make sure that is just good enough to win us games. And now it's almost the opposite, right? Where the defense is not good enough and they're relying on the offense to carry them. And I would expect that to change moving forward with Mike Macdonald. I think he was one of the better coaching hires of this most recent cycle. We saw 8, if you count the Raiders hiring Antonio Pierce, even though he was the interim in 2023. I think Mike Macdonald is, along with Jim Harbaugh and Raheem Morris, I think he was a great fit for Seattle and what that team is about, like what that organization feels like, which is we're going to hammer you with our defense. We have one of the best home field advantages in the entire sport, and they just feel like, hey, a defensive leader is appropriate. And Mike Macdonald, largely considered, one of these younger coaching geniuses, great scheme, knows football. The one thing you hear about the guy is he's just incredibly smart. He's a next level thinker on that side of the ball. And the thing that's different in Seattle and a lot of coordinators deal with this, right? Especially when you're in your first year as a head coach. When he was at Michigan and then the Baltimore Ravens, he had the horses, right? He had plus matchups all over the field. And that's just going to take some time. The one thing that they have going for them, and from what we assume, just observing from the outside, John Schneider is one of the better general managers in the sport. And he's always, worked well with, like when Pete was there for all those years. Pete was not the general manager of the Seattle Seahawks. He had a lot of input, but he was not going to get the final say on all the roster transactions. He was behind a lot of them, right? I'm not naive, right? When Pete got there, I forget what year it was, but they made something like, it was some sort of record for transactions made, and they weren't big splashes. It was like, sign this guy, cut that guy, send this guy to the practice squad, elevate that guy. Pete brought a lot of old Pac-10 guys into the organization during his first few years there. Remember, as an example, right? Brandon Browner was a corner at Oregon State. Well, Pete played against Oregon State. He saw him up close. Guess what? Brandon Browner becomes a part of the Legion of Boom. Like, I think the guy was in the CFL, right, prior to Pete bringing him into Seattle. So I don't want to frame it up as Pete wasn't instrumental in how the roster was ultimately built, but Schneider was in charge. He is in charge, and I think he is a guy who works well with the head coach, even if they don't agree on every single transaction. And I think if you look around the league, most of the successful teams, that is the case, right? Kansas City, I'm sure there are times that Veach and Andy Reid don't see eye to eye on a certain player, or whether it's the draft, or is this guy the guy we should bring in free agency, and that's fine. Same thing in San Francisco with Shanahan and John Lynch. But you have to have enough of a shared vision and see things the same way to enough of a level where it's like, okay, it might not be 100% of things that we are going to be in lockstep on, but it's close enough that we know what the vision for this roster is and where we see this team going. And you're not going to hire Mike McDonald if that's not the case. So I would say, unlike college where you used to hear, and give the guy a full recruiting cycle, right? Give him 4 years. Another off season and more time to bring his kind of players in, implement his system, continue to get people comfortable with it. I really think that we are going to see that Seattle defense resemble more of what you got used to or what would expect when you think of Seattle Seahawks. I think the front seven, look, Woolen's a really good player, but I think they have a lot of areas to address, certainly in that front seven. And I think they will get that fortified through free agency, through the draft, and just another offseason of these guys working in McDonald's system. The other game that we thought was going to be more entertaining, it certainly was not as entertaining as the Rams and the Seahawks. Exciting matchup, at least on paper, with the Bears headed to Arizona, Caleb Williams squaring off with Kyler Murray. Thought it had the potential to be one of the more exciting games of the day. That was not the case. What was going on with the roof in that game? I had it on mute, and I saw what looked like rain. Then I saw the hail, and then they kept flashing to the roof. I'm assuming right, they were trying to show it closing. And my question is, I understand the roof can't close in an instant, right? It's not like you clap your hands and the roof is closed. But I have to ask, if it takes 10-ish minutes for the roof to close, how do you not have some radar that would indicate weather is moving in at least like 20, 30 minutes before. That should have been, right, enough time where you get that thing closed up. Now, fortunately, it didn't seem to impact the play on the field. I actually think Santos from Chicago nailed the long field goal right kind of before the roof closed, but it was, still raining and hailing, but, the guy still nailed it. But with a retractable roof, and several stadiums in the league have that, it's like, that's the whole point. If it's a beautiful day, awesome, keep that thing open. But if there's a threat of any kind of weather or precipitation coming in, well, let's get that thing closed. I don't like when the product on the field is impacted by the weather. And I understand some people will feel the exact opposite on that, right? Elements are part of football. I prefer to see the game settled on the field by the players, right? Not some bullshit call that we talk about the call instead of the actual game itself. Not 35-mile-an-hour winds. Not a driving rainstorm that forces everyone to take their gloves off and we don't get to see precision football. But, yeah, I mean, spending billions of dollars on a stadium with that technology, it's like, why can't somebody have a little bit of foresight there and make sure that that thing is closed up in time? Jonathan Gannon, I think he's a great fit for Arizona. It just works. He is a defensive guy, but I actually think it works in their favor. There is, and I certainly understand the thought of, well, hey, if you've got a young quarterback, dynamic player, you got to have an offensive guy there, to really make that work. And that was Kingsbury, yes, right? There was a connection to Kyler Murray going back to the college days. They hire Cliff, draft Kyler in that same offseason. But that's not the only formula that works. And I would argue that, and Kyler, while he's a younger player, relatively speaking, I mean, this is his 6th year in the league. So you're not exactly talking about a rookie quarterback trying to learn how to be successful in the NFL. He has shown over the years that he is capable, right? We just haven't seen like a really a full season put together where it's like, okay, there's a reason to believe in this team. I know they made the playoffs that year where they got smoked, and then it was all Kyler's body language is bad, whatever. Jonathan Gannon, I think there's the dynamic of Gannon coming from the defensive side of the ball, younger head coach, but he's not super animated on the sideline. And I think it works well because they still have offensive, right? They're still offensive coaches. You have an offensive coordinator. You have a quarterback coach. But I do wonder these are all human beings. So from a personality standpoint, what Gannon brings to the organization in terms of stability and leadership, which is what you need from a head coach, I think he's doing a fantastic job for this only being, a season and a half that he's been there. So I really like the way it feels in Arizona. I think Kyler Murray is playing with a different energy. Obviously, they draft Marvin Harrison Jr., so weapons, I mean, you have Harrison. Trey McBride is playing great at tight end. James Conner is just running through people. This Arizona Cardinals team is for real. I don't know if they ultimately win the NFC West. They certainly have an opportunity, right? You look back a few weeks ago, they beat San Francisco, and you could just as easily say, well, San Francisco blew that thing, and they should have never lost that game at home to Arizona. Arizona won the game against a divisional opponent on the road in which they weren't supposed to win. They also win in Miami in a game that the Dolphins pretty much had locked up in the second half. they're rolling. And you have to give them credit because I did not come into this season thinking this is where they would be at this point in the season with a chance to win the division, but a very real chance to be an NFC playoff team. So we'll see where it goes with them. Obviously, they go as Kyler goes. So as long as he stays healthy and this defense continues to play well, I think the Cardinals have a real chance at 9 or 10 wins in 2024. On the other side, very disappointing offensive game from the Bears. Not sure what's going on play calling wise, but Waldron feels like he's pulled back these last couple of weeks. It seems similar to, or feels similar to early in the season, where it felt like they weren't opening up the playbook and they're running a lot of basic stuff and the offense had no rhythm to it. And that's kind of what these last couple of weeks have felt like when they played at Commanders and then at Cardinals. Outside of those last couple drives in Washington, they really have not looked like the team that we saw. Now, strength of schedule comes into play, and you can go, well, when you're beating up on the Panthers, right, anybody could look good. But for whatever reason, it just feels as though, and I don't know if it's Caleb Williams making the wrong read or checking plays at the line, but it doesn't seem like they are being as aggressive offensively, and that's why I look at the play calling. If what changed from that winning streak they had there to now these last couple of weeks, and if the offense doesn't look good and looks out of sync, then yeah, of course, execution is a part of it, but I do question what's going on there from a play calling perspective, that they look so limited when, rookie or not, they are too dynamic to have these kind of offensive performances the last couple of weeks. I mean, there is some serious talent, explosiveness, athleticism that the Bears have. So to go in there and just get smoked by the Cardinals and not make that thing competitive, that was disappointing. Bears are now 4-4, and unfortunately for them, they play in the best division in football, at least so far. They're 1.5 games back of the division. I don't think the Bears, really have, 1.5. I don't know why I wrote that down. I think maybe that 1.5 is they're 1.5 games behind the third place team. So that puts it in perspective of, look around the league. There's a lot of divisions you can be 4-4 and very much alive in the division. That's not happening for the Bears this year. They still have to play the Lions, and it's hard to see the way the Bears have looked the last couple of weeks, them even splitting that one with the Lions. So I think the NFC North and the NFC overall is the Lions to lose, but Chicago at 500, they need to be careful themselves about what this backstretch looks like. Now, they have what should be a very winnable game hosting the Patriots next week. Then they have the Packers and the Vikings. So 3 straight home games here, 2 within the division. That, I think the Packers and the Vikings game, obviously those are going to be difficult, but the Patriots, at this point, you're on a 2-game skid. You have to win the game against the Patriots, especially when they're coming to your building. Then they go to Detroit. That's one of the Thanksgiving games. Then at 49ers, at Vikings. So that 3-game stretch right there, or really, let's call it a 5-game stretch, including the 2 home games. So host the Packers, host the Vikings, then 2 Lions, 2 San Francisco, then 2 Vikings. That is going to be, 4-4 could quickly become, Bears have a losing record going into the final few games of the season. And I think that would be a disappointment. I understand they have a rookie quarterback, but these are games that when you play 17 games, every one of them matters. And so start with this Patriots game next week. That would get them to 5-4, but I think this is going to be tough sledding for the Bears the rest of the way. We'll close this first half out here with some thoughts on the Cowboys. Their season is finished, and I'm sure Cowboys fans would probably tell me that ship sailed a long time ago, and they're probably right. I think, a lot more optimistic about what their chances were. I really thought that they could compete for the division. I mean, coming into the year, it's like Washington as a rookie quarterback. Philadelphia's season went up in flames at the end of 2023. The Giants suck, and Cowboys won the division last year, so you seem like an easy pick, but was wrong about that one. They are a disaster. They are clearly, we're halfway through the season, they are nowhere in the same stratosphere as Philadelphia and Washington. NFC East comes down to one of those two teams. Cowboys are 3-5. They cannot run the ball. They cannot stop the run. And Dak Prescott is now on injured reserve with the hamstring. And I saw the clip of him on the sideline, appearing to say to one of his teammates that, something to the effect of, we effing suck. And that's accurate. I think that's the one thing that, the Dallas fans might agree with in terms of the assessment there by Dak. They have, what's so surprising is they are one of the biggest brands, or you could argue they are the biggest brand of any individual team in the National Football League. They have not, and I double-checked this because it seemed like, that can't be the case, but it is. Going back to last season, they get throttled at home against the Packers in the first round of the playoffs. And that score was not, even though the score, looked bad, Packers reverse covered. I forget what the exact spread was, but it's one of those things where you take the alt spread with a bunch of juice and you would have won. The Packers completely owned that game, and whatever the exact score was there, if you watch that thing live, that it wasn't that close. They last won at home in Jerry World December 30th of 2023. That was the game, if you remember, the controversial Dan Campbell offensive, he called the trick play there with the offensive line. Did he report? Did he not report? And the Lions end up losing a close one to Dallas. That was the last game the Cowboys won in their building. So we're talking about over 10 months now since a team that we are led to believe, is one or was one of the NFC candidates, right? I mean, potentially NFC Final Four, win the division, in the NFC Championship game, and they not only have no chance at the division, their season is cooked. It's not just that they're losing at home either, and I said this on a previous episode. They are getting destroyed, just embarrassed. It's an effort thing. And I don't see that changing, right? I mean, no Dak Prescott now for at least the next 4 weeks. That trend of being garbage at home, hard to see when that's going to change. Their next two, they host the Eagles this coming Sunday. Then they've got a Monday night game in Week 11. They host the Texans. They have no chance to win either of those games. Even with Dak Prescott, you're looking at that going like, ugh. What are the chances that if you got crushed like that by the Saints, who are obviously garbage, if that happened against them, what do you think is going to happen against Philadelphia or the Houston Texans? So the Cowboys seem very likely to drop to 3-7. Then they go on the road to play the Commanders, who are one of the feel-good stories of the first half of the season. Hard to see them winning that thing. Their next realistic chance, and I say that cautiously, their next chance at winning a game, I really think, is Thanksgiving. They host the Giants. But again, without Dak, that will be the fourth game. So he being placed on IR, there is no chance that he's playing in that game. The New York Giants are coming in to Dallas, or I guess Arlington technically, to play a depleted Cowboys team who has, at that point, really nothing to play for, and they don't have their starting quarterback. I would not be surprised if the Giants go in there, as bad as their season has gone, as inept as they look. I would not be surprised if the Giants go in there and spoil the Cowboys' Thanksgiving game. This is a season to forget if you are a Dallas fan. It feels like ages ago that they won that opener in Cleveland. And at the time, it looked pretty impressive, right? Their defense was awesome that day. The offense had it going. But then we found out that the Browns suck. And now you look at it in the rear view, and it's like, it almost is like that game never happened. Because to be sitting here, they beat Pittsburgh. They do have an impressive win on the road Sunday night in Pittsburgh. At the time, I said, hey, if they win it, I think it could reverse the fortunes of their season. It felt like they were spiraling already at that time. But they end up winning that game, and it was not the springboard that I thought. So I think there's a lot. They are not in a they've got to rebuild, but it seems really hard to imagine a future in which Mike McCarthy will be the coach. I thought it was quite an unprecedented move to let him come into this lame duck year where he doesn't have an extension and you're more or less like, hey, prove it, Mike. And coming off of 3 straight 12-5 seasons, I did not expect this kind of collapse from the Cowboys, but they've already lost as many games in 2024 as they lost in the entirety of each season, 21, 22, and 23. So we'll see what the future holds for Dallas. The one thing that is noticeable about this year's team, and I was thinking about this, forget just back to Zeke's rookie year when he won the rushing title. Dallas has had for more or less the past decade, all the way back to the DeMarco Murray year, they have had one of the better offensive lines in football. They could run it. They could protect Dak. Even last year, you had the combination of Dowdle and Tony Pollard, and that was a successful rushing attack, successful enough that it kept the pressure off of that passing game, but they just have nothing going for them. And I think the reason you're seeing the passing game look the way it has so far this year is there's just no threat. Teams do not respect or have any concern that the Cowboys are going to gash them in the run game. So it's early, but unfortunately, I think if you're a Dallas fan, you got to look forward to next year. And I think the Cowboys really need to look at doing something to get that offensive line back on track. The defense, you got to do something there. You cannot, if you can't run the ball and you can't stop the run, then you have no chance in the NFL. And Dallas has had a quick drop in both of those categories, but they're not winning at home. They have a real chance to, I think, just the law of, progression to the mean. It's the NFL. Weird shit happens in football. But I do think they will get at least one of these home games before the year closes out. But the way they are playing right now, it is possible, and it sounds absurd, but it's possible we close out 2024 and say the Dallas Cowboys have not won a home game in over a calendar year. Thanks for listening.